Syrians were celebrating across the world today, just one day after Syrian rebels declared they had ousted President Bashar al-Assad from office. It marks the end of a decades-long dictatorship by the Assad family. Neighboring countries saw long lines of displaced Syrians at border crossings, looking to return home after years of instability and war. But the future of Syria remains uncertain.
This moment presents a historic opportunity, but it also carries considerable risks. History shows how quickly moments of promise can descend into conflict and violence. ISIS will try to use this period to reestablish its capabilities.
Ontario Liberal MP Omar Alghabra is a Canadian MP of Syrian descent, maybe the only Canadian MP of Syrian descent. He joins me in the studio. Omar Alghabra, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
David, good to be with you.
You've seen the joy in the, they're not protests, but gatherings around the world. What does it mean for you as a Canadian of Syrian descent to see the end of this regime?
Well, I'm as old as the Assad regime. I'm 55, and I've only known Assad's ruling Syria, not just ruling Syria, but ruling Syria with brutal force and oppression and denial of rights and corruption. To see the end of that regime was first like a moment of disbelief, but also a lot of joy. I've been speaking with family members of mine who live in Syria. I've been speaking with other Syrians in Canada and around the world. And you can't overstate how relieved and happy people are.
It all happened so fast. These rebels just moved at this lightning speed. And on Friday when we heard, I think it's the city of Dara, where the army just negotiated, we'll leave, you can have it. That was a pretty clear sign then that the end was probably near for Assad.
Yeah, I mean, it took, I want to try to call it a bloodless transition, but it's really unfair to call it that because hundreds of thousands of Syrians paid for their lives over the last 13 years of civil war, and hundreds even before that. So but the last 10 days of the rebel movement has been incredible to watch, where they've been taking city after city through negotiated conversations with locals, villages of even minorities and other communities have been welcoming these rebels. The army, the official army, has been putting down their arms and defecting. So it's been really incredible to watch over the last 10 days.
You said you had family there. I believe your mother lives in Syria. What is your mom, what are others saying to you about what's happening over there now?
Again, I can't overstate how happy and relieved they feel. Look, Syrians are not naive. They're also aware of the risks that are around the corner and what the next change may look like. But for this moment, they feel a sense of tremendous relief and happiness.
Right. It's hard to worry about what comes next when you're celebrating the end of what has been, when it has been so cruel and difficult. But, you know, on the what's next, there's a lot of unknowns about exactly where this rebel group, you know, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, I believe, HTS, the group that is part of this, is a designated terrorist organization in a lot of countries. I mean, what are your thoughts on what might be next for Syria?
I don't know. Obviously, there are risks, and there are still a lot of unknowns. And I am quite cautious about what's next. I'm hopeful and optimistic, but there are a lot of unanswered questions. So far, the rebels appear to be operating in a very smart, efficient, and diplomatic ways. You know, the images, I don't know if you've seen some of these images of people being released from detention who've been there, some of them since the 80s, where their families don't even know they existed or they're still alive. The way they've been dealing with neighborhoods, the way they've been dealing with former military officials. They've been working collaboratively with the former prime minister. So they appear to be doing some of the right things, but obviously there are still a lot of unanswered questions. I am really hopeful for a transition towards a peaceful, democratic state where everyone who is Syrian feels a full member of society regardless of their background and regardless of their political beliefs.
You said off the top, you're 55 years old. You came here as a student from Syria. When was the last time you've been back to the country?
2007. That was the last time I've been to Syria.
What do you think now? I know you have family over there. I don't know if I mean, being in politics and with a regime like the Assad regime in place, it is a difficult thing for you to do. I would imagine to go to a country like that. Your father, when he passed, the funeral was there, that political reality made it almost impossible for you to go there. Do you think there's an opportunity for you to go to your homeland and see some of the family members and visit your father's grave, for example?
It's been really tough, and it's a choice that I made over the last few years not to go to Syria, given that the Assad regime was still in power. I think this may open an opportunity for me to visit. I'm going to wait and see how things unfold, but I certainly would love to go visit my mom and my sister and her family and other family members and walk the streets of Damascus again.
Well, what should Canada do, just to come back to your life as a parliamentarian? You know, there is the terrorist designation around HTS. But obviously, the displacement of the Assad regime is something Western democracies are celebrating. How do you approach this? I'm not even sure what kind of a power structure will come out of this at this point. How should countries like Canada and the West approach this new reality?
Look, first of all, Canada has been a friend to the Syrian people. We certainly, as a country and as a government, supported accountability for the crimes of the Assad regime. We welcomed refugees here during the civil war. And I know that our government would like to see a peaceful, democratic, inclusive government in Syria. And I think we should pursue opportunities where we could work with like-minded like-minded countries, other NGOs, to provide assistance. We still don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but I think Canada should play a role in helping Syrians and Syria at this critical moment. But we have to wait and see how things are going to unfold.
I remember well in 2016 in particular when a lot of, a period after you guys won the election in 2015 into 2016 of the Syrian refugees coming to Canada in fairly large numbers. I spoke with Amir Fatal today, who lives in Oakville, sort of in your neck of the woods, and he talked about being able to go home. He came here 8 years ago with his wife and one kid. He now has 3 kids. But he studied international development at the U of T in the hopes that he could someday take that back to Syria. Do you think a lot of Syrians might consider doing something like that if this stabilizes in a way that allows for them to go back and help rebuild after these long decades?
David, like you, I welcomed some of those newcomers, Syrian newcomers, in 2015. And I was meeting some of these families. And I met a Syrian dad who came in with 2 kids, a boy and a girl. And I said to him, look, I'm originally from Syria, and today I'm a member of parliament. Tomorrow your kids will have a chance, if they choose, to become maybe even the prime minister. He told me, you know what? I just wanted to stay home. I didn't even want to come here. I wanted to stay in Syria. So I tell you, I don't know. It'll be up to each individual based on their circumstances, their family circumstances, their other life circumstances. But I think the idea of the option of going back to help rebuild the country might intrigue several of my fellow Canadians who are originally from Syria.
Well, home is a powerful thing, but so is hope. And that's what this moment gives, right? That there's hope now that to go home and make a better home now that Assad is in Moscow or wherever.
The Syrian people have been hoping for 55 years. Today, or on Sunday, they have now seen for the first time in their lifetime an opportunity for that hope to become a reality. So the amount of energy, excitement, and optimism cannot be measured today among Syrians.
Well, Omar Alghabra, I hope that hope it bears some fruit, and I hope it's a safe and peaceful transition for the people who deserve it and need it. But thank you so much for coming in to speak to us today. This is Ontario Liberal MP Omar Alghabra. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to talk more about the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria. Qutaiba Idlbi is a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Rafik Hariri Center and Middle East programs, where he leads the council's work on Syria. Am I saying that right? Qutaiba? Am I saying that?
Qutaiba, yes.
Qutaiba. I apologize for that, sir. But thank you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, David.
You know well the hope that Omar Alghabra was just talking about, because you were imprisoned twice and tortured by the Assad regime in Syria before you fled. and became an academic. How does it feel for you to see this regime toppled years later?
So, I mean, it's definitely an unbelievable moment, David. Not only because of my experience, my dad also was detained 8 times between 1964 and 1980. I kind of inherited his, experience and his knowledge and his connections and his passion for a free and democratic Syria. So 62 years later, after the Ba'ath regime took over in Syria, it's an unbelievable moment. Not only for us as Syrians, not only for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Syrians who've gone through that experience of detention, torture, or being just oppressed by the Assad regime, but also a very, beautiful moment for the whole region. That moment that Omar was just talking about with detainees being released who've been in prison for almost 40 years. There were so many Lebanese, Jordanians, and Palestinians who've been in those prisons as well. So this is not only a celebration for Syrians, but for the whole region of the Levant, where families continue to wait for their loved ones.
You've said that Assad's fall is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Syria and the region. What opportunity does this present?
So this is the first time in long that Assad, whose main product out of Syria was his foreign policy, where he used to bully countries in the region through supporting rebel groups, through smuggling captagon and weapons, through his support for instability across the region. This is the first time this regime is gone. And this is the first time also in 50 years that Iran does not have an important base in the Levant through which it can launch destabilization across the region, whether that is to the west in Israel and Palestine, or whether that is in the Gulf. So there is a huge opportunity there to do the right thing in Syria. As Omar has hinted at, there is a lot for Syrians to tackle in the next months and years. This is the third republic of Syria, and we hope to be the most successful republic of Syria. But without an international community effort and support, we don't want Syria to go back to be a very unstable region. And a source of problems for the whole region. So the opportunity here is for the international community, for our government in the United States and other partners to do the right thing by supporting right now the needs of the Syrian people, by responding to the humanitarian appeals coming from NGOs across Syria, by supporting stabilization efforts, but also by working on making sure there is governing structures in Syria that is inclusive of everyone and every single group.
The rebels, though, who toppled Assad, there's a mixed background there, right? Some of it rose from a group from Al-Qaeda. So what challenges, there's even ISIS connections, what challenges do you see all of that presenting in terms of the West and for the Syrians?
So there's definitely big diversity among rebel groups. However, I want to build on the reality of the changes that happened in Syria in the last 4 or 5 years, where Syria was put on a back burner and the back burner was turned off. A lot has changed in Syria since then. So the rebels have become more organized. We are seeing, at least on a military and security level, definitely complete coordination and cooperation among the different groups to make sure that the operations are conducted in the right way. We've seen very minimal civilian casualties throughout the last 14 days, which is very impressive considering the amount of military operations that were happening. We've seen a very high level of outreach to minority communities to ensure the protection of different ethnic and religious minority communities, Christians, Alawites, Shia Ismailis, and others, which is very hopeful, I think, for the future of Syria and the ability of those different groups to move together. So the problem comes is, sorry.
No, you keep going. I thought you were done. You finish your thought, sir.
So the problem here is definitely with HTS and its designation as a terrorist organization. From a CT level, I think HTS has really shown in the last 6 years that it has broken away with Al-Qaeda, not only on an organizational level, but also as an ideological level. It's really hard to pinpoint HTS as a transnational jihadist group. It's definitely have a more national agenda now. It has been doing a lot of reforms in terms of its approach to local governance. It has definitely fought ISIS and Al-Qaeda and has become the main counterterrorism force in northwest Syria. The problem lays, however, is in looking at what governing structure would HTS put in place and how inclusive it is. So there's definitely a question to look at what the conduct of HTS would be and how inclusive it is of everyone in Syria, not only the rebels themselves, but as I mentioned, all the different ethnic, sectarian or religious groups all across Syria. But however, Sorry, yeah.
No, I was going to say, that was where I wanted to go, was the question about HTS, right? Because they are a designated terrorist organization in other countries. And there have been these moves, for example, to decree don't harass women for what they wear, which in a traditional Islamist sense, because that's the shorthand that's been used to describe some of these rebels, you look at it from a Western perspective and go, what is replacing Assad, right? But do you take these changes as sincere, I guess, is what I wonder. Does HTS truly look like a reformed organization from its origins with ISIS and Al-Qaeda and going back to those roots?
Exactly. So I think those changes are sincere. In my opinion, though, they're not enough. We need to see, we don't want another authoritarian rule in Syria. So that's why I think the question of inclusivity is important. But also the test of HTS governance system, this is actually under practice today. So when HTS was only governing Idlib province, Idlib is a very one-tone province. In a sense, it's a very rural Sunni community of Syria with 3 Christian communities and 3 villages and 2 Druze communities and another 2 villages. HTS dealt well with those communities. However, the overall structure of Idlib province is very different, for example, than Aleppo or Damascus as a metropolitan communities. Is different from the Christian Valley in central Syria, and it is very different also from the Alawite community in Syria's west. So we need to see how HTS will function. I will believe what I see in the next months and years. However, I feel I think we have the levers, the leverage levers to push HTS to go in the right direction. We do have its designation as a foreign terrorist organization, which should only be used or lifted if we see reforms and assurances that this governing structure would be actually respectful and inclusive of everyone. But also, I think as an off-ramp, we need to create an accountability mechanism for HTS's previous crimes, for sure.
Just as a final point, I mean, how do you see them governing? Because it seems unlikely you go from 50-odd years of the Assad regime to a democracy like we would see here. I mean, we're looking at governing councils that are representative of the regions, the different ethnic groups and religious groups. How do you see it potentially working in a way that might alleviate some of the concerns of the Western countries that might be called, and other regional players that might be called upon to come in and help with the development and the stability that Syria is clearly going to need?
Definitely. So in the next 2 years, I think we need to kind of be patient with the governing structures in Syria. As I said, we are talking about building Syria's third republic. And Damascus, on the morning of Sunday, it was actually living 2003 Baghdad moment, where in a sense, the whole government structure has actually collapsed. I think the Syrian people have shown that they are careful enough about their own country, that they do care about building a better Syria. And that's why we haven't seen a lot of, massive scenes of looting and destruction, which is a very positive sign for how Syrians want to deal with their future state. However, as I said, for the next 2 years, we should expect that there is a lot of organization that needs to be done just to figure out how to stabilize the situation in Syria. Meanwhile, I think we really need to use our leverage, our presence, our engagement with the Syrian people as tools to make sure that the future of Syria will be brighter than what it is today.
Qutaiba Idlbi, Senior Fellow with the Atlantic Council. It was good to meet you, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Same here. Thank you, David.